So, what does it mean to redefine someone's story, and why is that so important to do as fast as possible?
It's all about the narrative, about our story and about the reality that we meet. Is my story going to be a story of a victim, or am I going to call myself a survivor? And somebody who not just survives, but thrives despite that traumatic event.
Glenn Cohen was an Air Force pilot, a Mossad officer, a hostage negotiator, and a Special Forces psychologist. He served in the Mossad for over 25 years, retiring as the chief of psychology with the equivalent rank of a colonel. During the current Israel-Hamas war, Glenn served for over 100 days in reserve duty as the head psychologist of a team that debriefed the hostages upon their return.
There's tons of research on the different aspects of post-traumatic definitions. The fact that I went through something traumatic doesn't make me into a loser or a victim or somebody who's helpless. No, the opposite. I went through it, I survived it. That means I have resilience. That means I can cope. That's a completely different narrative.
So, what does it mean to redefine someone's story, and why is that so important to do as fast as possible?
Well, it's all about the narrative. The external reality is not really relevant. What's important is our narrative about our story and about the reality that we meet. And so when somebody comes out of a traumatic event, which could be, let's say in battle or hostages, being in a life-threatening situation, or it could be somebody in business who has, you lose a deal, or an athlete who loses a game. That's the event. And then the question is, what's your story? How do you what's your narrative? How do you explain that? In what light do you depict that? Like, does it mean that I'm a loser? And then as a result of that, I'm going to go around with this image and feelings and behavior. Or am I a winner like Michael Jordan, who says, because every single time I lost or I missed a shot, that's, because of that, I'm going to succeed. Same thing, somebody who comes out of captivity or somebody who goes through a traumatic event, is my story going to be a story of a victim? Or am I going to call myself a survivor and somebody who not just survives, but thrives despite that traumatic event? So it's all in our not all, but I would say 80% in our mind and the story we tell ourselves. And if we believe in this story, which is a positive story, which not that what happened was good, but that this traumatic event is something I believe I can grow from. And the fact that I went through something traumatic doesn't make me into a loser or a victim or somebody who has, somebody who's helpless. But no, the opposite. I went through it. I survived it. That means I have resilience. That means I can cope. That's a completely different narrative than somebody, and I see it across the board, whether it's people, who come out of combat or hostages, or also people in business. It's the same idea.
How often are people not willing, or they struggle to take on that identity of a survivor, of someone who's done the right things? And if it is a common thing, how do you help people get out of it and transition to a better kind of mindset around this?
Well, that really depends on your personality, and there are people who they grew up and they have every one of us has a story and a narrative about ourselves, and some people have a positive story, some people have a negative, and it's all based on, it starts the way we grew up, and so some people go through life feeling that that's it, I'm a loser, I'm worthless, and parents have a big impact on that. All a child needs is one adult who believes in him, not necessarily the parent. If the parent doesn't believe in them, then it could be a teacher, a mentor, or whatever. But those of us who come already with a positive approach, they're going to end up going further. And you have people who have this negative take on themselves, and they, if someone like that comes to me to work, it's a lot harder, and I'll need to work harder. And when somebody sits down on the couch behind me here in either in a therapy session or in an executive coaching session, and they're going through a rough time, I'll say, okay, dude, this is, you're in the midst of this now. It's really bad. It's traumatic, but believe me, this will, it has so much potential for growth. And that's a difference. Some people will be able to say, you know what, maybe you're right. I'm willing to consider that. And some people just they fall in love with their story of, the negative story of being a victim, and they'll end up just wanting to have that label of somebody who's had gone through tough times and is a victim, and they want people to feel sorry for them. And that's really rough. That's hard to work with. And those people will not get as far as somebody else who's willing to say, okay, I went through that, but I'm gonna lift myself up from it, and I'm not gonna fall in love with it. I see it time and time again with people in the who come out of the military and they're injured either physically and or mentally. Some people will ask for recognition and help, which is a good thing. But some people will take that upon themselves as like a label and as like their identity. I am a cripple. I'm a handicap. I'm disabled because of the Army. And they have the, literally like an ID, and they'll put it on their car, and that's me. And they want people to relate to them that way. And there other people will say, okay, I have this certain disability, and because I was injured, but I'm not going to let that define me. Despite that, I'm going to keep on pushing and grow. And that's the difference of, it's a different mindset, and it's a lot easier to work with the latter.
How much do you think that has to do with whether or not somebody had let's call it a quote unquote positive self-identity of themselves before whatever had happened? For example, the kid before the military who was already had the affection of his parents, or already had, let's say, a great partnership with a girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it may be. And then they went through something while already having the belief that I am worthy of attention, as opposed to somebody who did not have that growing up. And then all of a sudden, like this kind of what they're getting out of calling themselves a crippled or identifying as this or that, it gives them this kind of sense of attention that they've never had before. And that's where they grasp onto it. Is that a big part to do with it, or is just some people are just wired like that and some people are not?
Well, at the end of the day, 90+% of the issues that people are dealing with, it's all about self-esteem and self-worth. And that's what it boils down to. We all need and crave a sense of self-worth, which is fed by affection, attention, admiration that we get externally. And so it could be that somebody who is used to getting so much attention, and he's a golden boy, and then all of a sudden, get to the military and he'll meet failure for the first time. That could be overwhelming, and that's a real test, because sometimes it's actually we say what doesn't what doesn't kill you fortifies you, and so sometimes it's actually there's a big advantage to go through, to have a childhood that's a bit tough, that you will be tested, and that you won't always be not to have a cushy childhood, because some people like that, if they meet for the first time the failure, it can be crushing and much harder to overcome.
So I want to kind of bring this back a little bit to the hostages. When you're dealing with someone who's gone through something as extreme as that, and how can you help these people? Like, this is literally your job, your team, this is what you guys do as a part of it. Tell them kind of reconcile and reintegrate. And is there a point where there's a conversation of, hey, you've been through this stuff, it's horrible, and at the same time, we need to move forward with your life? Or how does that work?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's that's really one of the big challenges to, on the one hand, to really acknowledge that that it's hell and they were in hell, and but at the same time to stress that you went to hell and came back to tell the tale. You survived that, and the fact that you are here, the fact that you came to this moment where I would meet them, as they arrived at the hospital, coming in with a helicopter, and to speak with them, a couple of hours after they've arrived, and to say, yeah, wow, that was tough, but wow, look at you, you survived it. You're standing, or even if you're just lying down, and if you're in a bed, but you're here, breathing. And the fact that you survived that, we need to stress what that means about you and your coping abilities and your resilience. And that's something that you need to find the fine balance between those two, because you don't, and it depends on the person. Some people, like I said before, will want to be more of a victim and say, oh, how terrible it was. And some people will try to brush it off. But so it's really important to pace and lead and to meet the person where they're at, not to make any shortcuts, and not to tell them too quickly, oh, you're such a hero. You have to acknowledge, see where they're at. You have to be like just really with them, not too far ahead of them. Pace and lead, to feel where they're at. And if they're talking about, oh, how terrible it was, and say, yeah, it was terrible. It is terrible. And not to push too quickly, but to keep that in your arsenal, and be ready to, when they're ready to hear it, to give them that extra push and encouragement, and say, wow, it's amazing, and if you survive that and you cope with that, then wow, what does that mean about, then of course you can cope with the rest of life. And to add, the support network that you have now, if it's the whole, the staff and professionals, mental health, and family and friends, together, you will definitely be able to get through this. So it's really important to have like a sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, and to have, sort of like the Pygmalion effect, to also suggest that yes, we know you will be able to get through this, because for them it's, they may find it hard to believe, and you have to remind them, suggest it, believe in it yourself, and little by little they'll also believe that and adopt that, together with going through all the post-traumatic effects of going through something like that. So it's really it's a delicate balance, and a bit of a dance between those two.
To summarize kind of what you said, is it a bit of a dance as far as when you said acknowledge that it's hell? So basically the dance is to make them feel understood, not that somebody's not trying to listen to them or hear them. And then also to help them imprint the identity of like, oh, but it was hell, but look at you here now, look at you surviving this, look at you doing this. So what does this mean about the kind of person you are? It probably means something positive. And it's kind of a back and forth dance between the two, making them feel heard, and then like telling them what they need to hear in order to move forward, basically.
Yeah, that's a good summary.
Yeah. So question around that is, so you talked about some of the people, they want to hold on a little bit more to the identity of, I just went through this and what this means. And some people naturally just want to move past it. Do you think there's also a benefit to those people who want to move past it too fast, perhaps, to actually digest what happened? Or is that not the time now? Or what are your perspectives on that?
Yeah, well, it really depends on the situation. In general, I can say as a rule of thumb, it's important to process, and not to move on too quickly. But there's no hard and fast rule as far as when that time is, because there are some people who um, they need time, and they need to feel, as part of their self-efficacy and their belief in themselves, that they can move on. They need to literally move on, and they need to be, let's say, doing as opposed to being. For example, now we're still in the midst of this terrible hostage ordeal. The 250, 117 have come back alive. 30 something have been brought back as bodies, and there's still 100 there. And so the ones who came out, they are mostly busy with doing, and the doing is to try to bring back the remaining 100, because they feel terrible, and just like everyone in Israel, we all feel like it's our brothers and sisters who are there in captivity, and but they especially are surviving from a sense of survivor guilt at the fact that they came out and they literally feel like they were torn from their friends or family members who were left behind. And so for them, it's not the time to process and feel, what they're feeling. It's for them, they need to do and to take care of as much as possible of others, and to do whatever they can to bring the other ones back. And that's what's going to calm them down. And when the time comes, they'll be able to deal with themselves. So, a lot of the hostages who came back are not they're not in therapy at the moment, because they're just, they feel like they don't have the headspace for it. So that's okay. That's what they need to do. But I would say that if somebody just moves on and doesn't process whatsoever, and let's say for me, I lost my father when I was 6 years old, and I just moved on, and I put on this facade. I'm the Iceman. I don't need anybody. I'll never be vulnerable. And only in my late 20s, 30s did I allow myself to really process it. And so that was a bit late. It would have been better if I would have processed it earlier.
When you say a bit better, because this was a very interesting part for me when we talked about this back in the day, is why is it so important to redefine that like as fast as possible? Basically, the moment after the traumatic event, to immediately have that kind of intervention in some way. Yeah. What are the ripple effects? They're saying this is why it's so important.
Yeah. Well, there's tons of research on the different aspects of post-traumatic definitions. There are different labels of there's post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, is given as a diagnosis only after at least 1 month after the traumatic event. Up until 1 month, it's not considered a disorder, because it's just it's a whatever symptoms somebody is exhibiting, they're considered a normal reaction to an abnormal event. And so that's why in that first month period, if you can already talk about it and process it, it raises the chances that it won't develop into a full-blown disorder. Because actually, just like getting it out of your system, literally and figuratively, it leaves less sediment, and therefore there's a better chance of your prognosis is actually better. And people who just leave it inside and they can't, it's sort of also like an animal in the in savannah who's under attack by a lion. You have the gazelle who has the fight, flight, freeze reaction, and when they run, and when they manage to flee from the predator, you'll see them lie down, and they shake, their entire body shakes, and they discharge. They let it out of their system, that traumatic experience. It's really important to discharge it, also in physical ways. And a lot of people who go, they'll go for a good run or a good workout, beat up some punching bag or whatever. It's good to get it out of your system, physically, but also by talking about it and emotionally to discharge it, so it doesn't stay stuck in the system. That's why the sooner the better.
So to kind of recap, a bunch of the stuff you're saying is that in order to help somebody move, it's crucial to try to do it as fast as possible from the traumatic event, because that's when they really get to define the narrative of what happened and who they are in this. And that's also going to help them decide how they're going to see themselves moving forward. And in order to do that, first thing is acknowledging what they've been through. So they actually think, okay, this person understands me. I'm not just like, I'm going to get some kind of the recognition, perhaps, for what I've been through. And once they're on board with that, you move on to the next step, is what you're saying, like, yes, you were in hell, absolutely. But you also came back and you survived. And wow, look at you. And what does this mean about you? And the next step, which is kind of what I'm assuming just from hearing what you're saying, is to actually almost figure out a plan of action of how can you prove to yourself that you're indeed this kind of person. What are your next steps to be in the doing, like you said? For some of the hostages, okay, I'm going to be a part of this whole movement to try to release more of the hostages and help support that as much as I can. But I wanted to ask, is that something that you actually think is a good idea? Obviously, there's a different pace for every person, but to actually provide, okay, let's figure out what are the next tangible steps. You're in this place, so what are the next things you can do to keep showing yourself that you are this kind of person that's surviving, that's doing, and so on, and thriving?
Yeah, I think it's so much of it is about being able to have the ability to look back and say, oh, you know what, I succeeded, and every time you succeed, to put that on your list of successes, and then each time you encounter adversity, you look back and say, hey, I've done either this or something similar, or some kind, I've dealt with some type of adversity, and doesn't necessarily have to be the exact same thing, but the same thing of even just like doing endurance events. I do ultra marathons or Ironman competitions, and it's not about the doing whatever it is, 180 kilometers by bike and 42 kilometers running and 3.8 kilometers swimming. That's not okay. That's nice, but it's symbolic. It's like, wow, because the first time I heard about an Ironman length, I was like, no way in the world, this is impossible for me. It's only for supermen. But when I managed to, little by little, the first time you do something and you succeed, you say, wow, I can do this. And if I can do this thing that I thought that was impossible for me, then wow, what does that mean about other things in life? And therefore, the idea is for us to realize that we're all capable of much more than we imagine, and we limit ourselves. And so every time I succeed in something that I doubted myself, it's symbolic for other things. And I need to look back and say, okay, well, I did that. I doubted myself, but here I succeeded. So that means I can step up to the next challenge. And so each time you gotta, and the idea is not to set too high a bar, and that's where I talk about, moving out of your comfort zone, but not too far out so that it's in the panic zone, but to, push out little by little so it becomes the learning zone. And each time you set another goal, and you that's a little bit tougher, increase, by whatever, 5%, 10%, the difficulty level. And you say, wow, here, I succeeded in this. And again, and then you look back and say, wow, I'm capable of so much more than I thought.
This is a bit of a segue, but do you think that's why it's so important for people to celebrate their wins more often in business and in so on? Because it kind of cements that self-belief, like, oh, I did this thing and I celebrated it, and it makes me remember that I actually accomplished this thing.
Completely. It's all about self-efficacy and, feeling that I am capable, and, life in general, we create this illusion of control. At the end of the day, none of us are really in control of our lives. And I'm saying that just because of the extreme situation. If I contrast it to, not our day-to-day lives, but the hostages, who they are literally in the, worst possible situation as far as, having no control. But even there in captivity, where you have the least control, and apparently, it seems as if you can't win, but we teach our soldiers when they go through POW training, to have these small wins, and we literally use that terminology, and you find the way, even in that situation where you have no control, you can have these small wins, and that's also what the hostages did there. I've got plenty of examples of that, and it's the same thing also in life. Even though okay, we're not literally in captivity, but each one of us, everybody out there, we're all captive to a certain degree. We're in a we're captive in our limiting beliefs, the way we perceive ourselves, and we may feel that we're not. We're not good enough, and that we don't have enough wins. So it's really, really important to focus on our success, even though it's sort of paradoxical to people like me and you who go through. We're used to like elite training programs and special ops and Air Force, where the debriefing, and every single mistake you make, you learn from it. And you emphasize
It's the only
those
focus.
things.
It's the main emphasis, like you said.
Yeah, but that's something that we need to be really careful about, and not just to focus on our mistakes and how we learn from them. That's, of course, super important to debrief everything we did and learn from our mistakes. But not less important is to emphasize our wins, our successes, and to learn from them, to celebrate them. And it's not less important, even more important, and especially if we have people working under us, because even if, let's say, a guy like you, Itamar, you're one of the toughest guys I know, and you don't mind, you can go all day not celebrating your wins, and you'll be okay about that. And, but people, you're working with or work. For you, they're not as tough as you, and guys out there, CEOs who, they say, hey, bring it on, no problem. I just, I don't want to waste time, talking about my successes. Let's just learn from our failures. No, it's a mistake. We got to emphasize our wins, and remember, we can always find something positive, even if things are really going, sour, and things are bad, and rough times, whatever they are. And again, if I refer to the hostages, worst possible time, it's the darkest situation. But even there, you can find these small wins and a small array of light in that darkness, and then pull from that small ray of light little by little. Now it's the holiday season, Hanukkah and Christmas, and it's all about light. And even if it's dark, there's always somewhere where you can find a small ray of light, and you got to focus on that until it becomes bigger and bigger, and that's the way to move on.
I want to ask you about, if you could share an example, if you're allowed to do that, of any of the small victories you've actually seen some of the hostages be able to kind of just make up for themselves, or how are they able to cope with it to keep that hope? Because, and I'll say why. It's kind of, when I hear you speak, and a lot of things we talk about, the debriefing and all that, my thoughts are on that the debriefs are super important for your knowledge base, and the celebrating the wins are crucial for your spirit. And if you don't maintain your spirit, then whatever knowledge or capability you have, they won't matter. Because at a certain point, you're still a human being, and it'll feel not fun, not enjoyable, and you'll want to quit.
Yeah.
And the maintenance of the spirit to those wins, I'm very curious about how some of the hostages were able to do that. And especially because a lot of them are civilians. They haven't gone through POW training. So if they were able to kind of figure that out by themselves, or...
Yeah, well, that's really one of the most amazing things, and that's one of my, after this whole experience of, debriefing 117 hostages so far, and God willing, the ones that are remaining, one of the most amazing insights is that we really are so much more capable than we imagine. And even in that situation of captivity, these civilians did things that we teach our top commandos in POW training. And so these civilians did things. I'll give a few examples. It could be it could be an 80-year-old woman. It could be a 14-year-old boy. If we take, let's say, small wins, you can give the example of when you're in captivity, you don't have orientation, and your job is to, you don't have control. So your job is to try to maintain control. One of the ways of maintaining control is to have orientation, keep track of time. And so that's an example of many hostages managed to find ingenious ways to keep track of time. One 14-year-old kid was given 3 dates every day, and he would eat the dates and put the pits aside, and 3 pits every day, and he would keep track of that, and then he knew how many days went by according to the pits. Another lady had she was in her 60s, and she had this small little stool made from bamboo, and she scratched every day another scratch on this stool. And after like 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 days, she knew exactly how many scratches were there. And so much so, she knew, but her captors came up to her and said, how many days are we here already? She knew better than them.
Wow.
How many days had gone by, which is incredible when you think about it. There are other examples of having small wins where this is something we teach our commandos also, to when you're in a situation of so you're being interrogated by somebody, you look at the interrogator and you say to yourself, you don't say to him, but you say, oh, you know what, you like make fun of the interrogator to yourself. You feel like you're getting you say, oh, this guy's ugly, this guy, you say all these things, these negative things about him to yourself, and you feel like, okay, I'm getting the better of him, I'm beating him. It's like it's a silly little thing, so to say, but it's a technique that helps people in captivity. And literally, I heard from hostages who came back, even like some children who found the way to beat their captors by like making fun of them, again, not to their face, but they had like these names for them. They called them different names. One teenage kid had a push-up contest with his captor, and he actually beat him. And so, little things like that just go such a long way.
So to kind of reflect back, what you're saying is that, also you said this at the beginning, that a lot of it is just our 80% thinks that is our perspective on a lot of this stuff. And using these kind of case studies as really, really extreme examples, but saying even in this situation, they were able to, in a way, change their sensation of control or power that they had, the dynamics of their life. And through that instilled a lot of hope. Is that correct?
Yes, and once you feel like because once you give up and you say, that's it, I'm helpless, that's it, it's game over. From there to dying of heartbreak and paralysis, it's not a long way to go, especially when you're dealing with malnutrition and hygienic conditions that are difficult. But if you have that spirit of feeling, oh, I can do this, I believe that I will get through this. And that belief has to be based on something. And so either you can base it on some external belief in some external cause, that, okay, I believe in, let's say, the country, the military, or God, God will save me, or the government will release me, the military will release me. That helps. But it's also not less important is a sense of self-efficacy and belief in oneself. And the fact that, okay, I can do this. I can get through this. Here, look, and I just proved to myself here, because look what I just did. I managed to maintain control in a seemingly, helpless situation. And then that means, wow, I can do this. There was one 80-year-old lady who, as she was being kidnapped, she was on a motorcycle being taken across the fields to Gaza, 80 years old. And she said to herself, okay, I've got a mission now. I've got to remember everything I can in order to come back afterwards and tell everything that I remember. And I can do this. I've been through a lot in my life, and I've got a mission, and I can do this. Imagine her sense of her belief in herself that she could do this. And so that was all about spirit. And she came out and she remembered so much, and she told us, and And that was an incredible example of how the belief is not just about, external, something greater than myself, but also belief in myself. You got to have that. In general, I talk about, resilience. It's three circles of belief. The inner circle is belief in myself. Second circle is my surroundings, which could be, my family, friends, teammates. And the third one is something greater than myself. And the more circles of belief that you have, the more resilience you're going to have.
Would it be accurate to say that, to kind of recap, to summarize what you're saying here, is that these are really powerful tools to keep the human spirit going? One, having a sense of belief, both external or internal, but then also having in some way a sense of control or power that you get through these kind of beliefs, that if I have this mission or if I do this thing, then it will mean this about me. And therefore, the situation isn't as bleak. And we can kind of almost give ourselves a delusion of what's going on, but that serves us really well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's definitely. It's all about creating this, and it goes back to your first question about our story, and the external reality. Like I said, is really less relevant than our perception of the reality and our story, and the more we can create this this bubble. In especially in such adverse conditions like captivity, and everything I'm talking about here about captivity, it's anybody who's hearing this has to realize it's completely relevant to our lives. Not that God forbid any one of you will be in captivity, but captivity is the most extreme situation of like the worst situation you could be in, and everything that helps us cope there are things that we can apply in our lives and any adverse conditions. And so we always need to create this sense of the way we perceive reality. But we have to. It's very tricky because you don't want to disconnect. In real life, like in business or whatever, you don't want to disconnect from reality. When you're in captivity, it actually sometimes, because it's so extreme, it actually helps to disconnect, and that is something we actually teach sometimes. Our in POW training, we help people. If you're being, let's say, if you're being beaten, you find a way to just coast off somewhere in your imagination, and imagine yourself in some hammock on a beach in Thailand, and you disconnect from the terrible situation you're in at the moment, and that's actually another tool that people use in your imagination to disconnect, but it depends on how bad the situation is. So it's good to use your imagination, even in if you're living a normal life in the business world, if things aren't going so well. Imagine a success. Imagine at the end of the year having the Christmas party or whatever, and everyone's celebrating that the big success that we had, even though right now things are bad. That helps, and it's really important to use that imagination and belief to create that that reality. It's sort of like a virtual reality, but it's got to be somehow connect based on a true story. And I can give you even more examples of how people manage to just maintain control and convince themselves that they are in control, even just in an interpersonal way in captivity. They manage to influence and have an impact on their captors, and this is something that we teach our in POW training. I call captivity an extremely stressful interpersonal situation, and that's something that it's hard for a lot of people to wrap their minds around, especially with this situation with the Hamas and all their barbaric behavior and what we saw on the 7th of October and as a terrorist organization and the way they act, it's hard to describe them as human beings, the way they've been behaving. But when you're in captivity, to realize that there's a person there from the point of view that it's a human being that you can actually influence and have an impact on. Once you realize that gives you a big advantage. even in captivity. I mean, in general, in life, everything in life it's all interpersonal, and
Yeah.
people who don't realize that they're not going to get as far. But it's all about influencing somebody else. And even in this worst case scenario of captivity, so much of it is about interpersonal, and the people who realize that and took advantage of that and have the emotional intelligence to be able to influence their captors and convince them to do things for them. For example, put the gun down. You're scaring the children, and they convince the captor to put the gun down. Or somebody else said, "Oh, I've got a cardiac condition. Let me get some exercise." And the captor agreed and let them walk down the tunnel like 600-700 yards, and then they see somebody behind bars. Oh, there's two other hostages behind bars, and she goes back and convinces the captors to allow them to not to release them, but to have them rejoin them and to take them out of that situation behind the bars, because she had the guts and the emotional intelligence to realize that she has the ability to have an impact and influence, and that also bolsters her sense of control. And so every time you experience another, it's also in the category of small wins, but within the specific category of like interpersonal area. So that just makes it easier to cope in this incredibly the situation. It's beyond words. It's hard to describe what they're going through. It's terribly traumatic, and it is hell. But even within that hell, there are these small ways to have these small wins.
So a question around that specifically, around having the small wins and building hope. Something we actually talked about back in the day when we were working together is that you told me about the Stockdale paradox, that people can actually die of a broken heart. And I'd be curious, first off, if you could just tell the listeners what that actually is, and how does that relate as far as, on one hand, wanting to make sure that somebody does have hope, and on the other hand, making sure that that hope doesn't crush them, so to speak, when it doesn't get met, or when something bad happens, or when there's an unexpected twist.
Yeah. Well, Stockdale's paradox is something really important for everybody to know in life. Whether you're just a person, without any responsibility, or especially if you're a leader. James Stockdale was a Navy pilot, and he was downed in Vietnam, and he was the highest ranking officer in captivity in Vietnam, and he survived 8 years in captivity in Vietnam. Imagine what that means. And when he was asked who survived and who didn't, he said that those who didn't survive were the ones who were too optimistic, which is really fascinating, because we would think optimism is most important, and have that belief, I'm going to be released. But what he said was the ones who were so optimistic and too optimistic and said we're definitely going to get released by Christmas time. Christmas came and went, and they didn't get released, and they died heartbroken, literally. And the same exact thing actually happened in the Holocaust. Viktor Frankl describes that in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. The same exact thing happened. There are people who put all their eggs in that basket of their belief and hope that they'll be released Christmas, and it didn't happen. They literally died heartbroken. So the same thing here happened. And so the bottom line of what he said is, his paradox is that what he said we need to do is, on the one hand, you have to look the reality, in the eye and say, okay, Houston, we have a problem, and not be too optimistic about the situation. Say, oh, everything's fine, everything will be fine. No, we have a serious problem here. You got to look the reality in the eye and say, we've got a serious problem here. But at the same time, and this is the paradox, to maintain this belief that we will prevail despite this difficult time, whatever we're going through. I believe we will prevail somehow, someday, somehow. Even if I don't know exactly when or how, I still have this belief, together with the sense of like, this is really bad. And that's the paradox that we all need to be able to hold.
Question for you about this is, in your perspective on this, from like all your experiences, the mastery about having that belief, but not having an attachment as to when and how exactly. Is that the real kicker? Because I remember they used to do this, for example, in the military. Like when they'd want to get you to quit, they'd just be like, oh, you need to climb this one more hill. And then you'd give it your all. And they'd be like, oh, there's actually 2 more hills after this.
Yeah.
And that belief of like when it's going to be over was the thing that was crushing. It wasn't the 2 more hills. And I was wondering about this. I was thinking about this before the interview. If that's the big thing, it's about in some way trying to maintain hope, but not having that attached as to when exactly it'll happen, because that could be when the letdown is.
Well, I would say it's not necessarily only the when. I mean, the when time is an important factor, but it's much broader than that. It's about maintaining hope no matter what. Like even though you are now in the lowest spot or feeling like things are so bad, you have this inner belief that I will prevail. And it doesn't really matter when or how, but like I have this inner belief that I will succeed, and that's really the essence of it, and it's all about believing, that when you go to bed at night and wake up in the morning, have this inner sense of like, oh, I am the type of person who, I'm a winner. I'm going to succeed. Even though I'm things are not, I'm not succeeding now, I firmly, I will never give up that hope, and I will succeed, and that's the essence. Of course, timing has, it's important, because that is one of the things that helps people most is that when they're going through a rough time, to say to themselves and convince themselves, this too shall pass, and to know and to believe that this is temporary. Because if it's not temporary, if it won't pass, then I might as well just commit suicide right now, because this is it. I'm stuck in this forever, in this agony of whatever it is. If somebody's in a really, in a rut, depressed, or of course, they're in captivity. If I'm not gonna get out of captivity ever, then what's the point of living? But to have that belief that this too shall pass, this difficulty is temporary, that is really an important thing to keep in mind. And so I'll just fortify also, like, with examples from the hostages, what they did, how they calibrated their sense of belief as far as the time. A lot of them, when they went in initially, they said, within a couple of days, we're going to be released. And then when they said that, then they said, okay, you know what? Someone said, you know what? It's more like a couple of months, and some of them actually got out after a couple of months. But there was somebody else, a kid, a teenage boy, who said, "What do I know about captivity? Who was in captivity from Israel? Who do I know? Gilad Shalit was the guy who was in captivity. How long was Gilad Shalit a soldier in captivity for? 5 years. So he said, okay, I'm in for 5 years. That was his mindset. One day earlier, that's a bonus. So he went in with that mindset, feeling like, okay, I'm in for 5 years. And that's how he calibrated, his belief, and, not to be too optimistic, which is amazing. And this is just a kid. And so it just means we all have the ability to adopt that mindset. I think that's really, really important for all of us to have that mindset. It's sort of like, hope for the best, but be prepared for the worst. And also as a leader, like if things are bad and, going through a rough time, not to say, oh, everything's fine, everything will be fine. No. Tell the company, tell your workers, tell everybody, tell the family, yeah, this is a rough time, but we're going to get through it.
The question about that, what you just said was interesting, that hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. When I hear you, it really sounds like almost more so believe in yourself and prepare for the worst. Is that kind of a more accurate spin on that saying? Because a lot of what I'm hearing from you is it's not I can make it until, or if this happens, or under these conditions, is that I can make it regardless.
Yeah. Well, I would say, it's not just myself. Again, harness all 3 circles of belief, because there's the old saying, if you want to go fast, run alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And so I used to be a loner myself, and it was all about, it was hard for me to work with others and trust others. But now I realize if you want to go furthest, the furthest distance and furthest in life. And succeed most, you got to have all three circles of believe in yourself, your surroundings, your teammates, your friends, your family, and to work together with them, and have belief in something greater than yourself. It's not enough just to want to make money. You have to have a belief in something greater than yourself or a greater cause to do good in the world or whatever, to have an impact. That will, together with believe in yourself and other people, that will help people get furthest and be prepared, for have contingency plans and be prepared for worst case scenarios. But it's about not just belief in yourself. It's really important to have those other two circles of belief.
Yep. Okay. I want to segue to something a little bit different. This is obviously a very, very sensitive topic, and there's a lot of paradoxes here. There's different fronts that get affected by the same thing, so to speak. And this is something we talked a little bit about briefly, but I want to ask you, how do you balance trying to actually cry out to the world, especially in your position, about how horrible it is, everything that's going on with Hamas, the hostages, October 7th, while at the same time trying to maintain the spirits of the families of the hostages and making sure they don't see themselves, especially the ones that have already been released, as victims? How do you manage that duality?
Yeah, it's really one of the things I struggle with most, and it's really challenging because, especially now, we're in the midst of it, and we still have 100 hostages there, which is just unfathomable. And the world has to realize that this cannot continue, and there has to be pressure applied on the Hamas to release the hostages that are there. They're not just Israeli citizens; they're also American citizens and other foreign nationals, and they're going through hell. They're being abused physically, emotionally, sexually, tortured, and it's just it's unfathomable, and unacceptable is the understatement of the year. And so that has to be clearly cried out to the world, and that message has to be broadcasted, and people have to realize how terrible it is there, and it is terrible, and it's hell. At the same time, though, we have to maintain this belief, and we have an agenda of our national and personal resilience, and part of that resilience, like we said before, is belief that they can and will survive this. So that's really the crux of it. To at the same time to say, okay, this is hell; they're going through hell, but to believe that they have the ability to cope. It doesn't mean that they should stay another day. They have to be brought back today. But if they're still there, and every day that they are there, we have to maintain this belief. And I meet also with a lot of hostages, families, and every family has to have that clear belief that my loved one who was there in captivity, I truly believe, despite everything, that there's no other option. He or she is going to be brought back. He's going to be recovered, and he will survive this. And to send that energy and that belief, and also because some of the hostages actually hear it or see it, because sometimes they are exposed to media, and they'll hear either on the radio or maybe even on TV. They'll hear people in Israel speaking at a demonstration, and the vibe that we have to send to them is that we believe in you and your ability to cope. And it's very, very, very tricky to have that duality, but it's got to be that, it's sort of like a 1-2 punch. On the one hand, to tell the world how terrible it is, but at the same time, believe. And I say this based on 117 stories that I've heard of people who went to hell and came back, and they had these incredible ways of coping. And even though they came back, after 2 months, 8 months, 10 months, So every day that goes by, it gets more difficult, and their shape physically and mentally is getting worse and worse. But we are capable, and we have this inherent resilience, and we got to believe that.
I want to talk about something a bit different now. And this is, I think, so when October 7th happened, you immediately jumped into action. You were called in by your reserve unit, and you immediately jumped into the mission, so to speak. And from the sideline, what's been very much something that I've admired about just seeing you and noticing how you've gone about this past year and a half almost now is how you've managed yourself through it all. And when this happened, a lot of people, myself included, like I felt very lost, for example. And we spoke about this last time we met in person. I don't think I told you this, but the concept, for example, you shared with me about how you also work with the elite units, and how you talked about how the guys that weren't in action on October, like the guys that are not in reserve duty, feel guilty about not being in reserve duty. The guys that are in reserve duty feel guilty about not being in active duty October 7th. The guys that were on October 7th feel guilty about not being in as many altercations. The guys that were in a lot of altercations feel guilty about not getting shot. And there's kind of this endless chain of everybody feeling guilty. And for whatever reason, for me at least, it helped me a little bit make sense of it, of why I was feeling so bad, and just kind of noticing that no matter what I did, probably unless I got shot in the chest, I would still feel guilty about it. And for whatever reason, that principle created a lot of relief in me. It still obviously feels bad, but it was something that logically I can kind of hang on to. And for you, I've seen you do many things that I think I perhaps wouldn't have had the maturity to do. Whether it's doing that adventure you did in Iceland, or I remember the post you wrote about like the power cry, things that you took care of yourself in ways that from the outside make complete sense. But most people rarely give themselves permission to do. And because they don't do that, they end up spiraling downward as far as their performance and their ability to actually help. Like that guilt doesn't help them, and it actually puts them in a state where they can't help others. And I would just love to hear your perspective on how you went about thinking about this and managing yourself and putting yourself in a position to be able to continuously perform and help.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I suggest to everybody to adopt these days is what I call an ultramarathoner's mindset. As an ultramarathoner, I can say that an ultramarathon is anything beyond 42 kilometers. People who run ultramarathons, they have three golden rules. One is drink before you're thirsty, eat before you're hungry, and rest before you're tired. Those are the golden rules of an ultramarathoner, because he knows that he's in it for the long run. And when you have that mentality, you think differently. And I think in a lot of ways, definitely people here in Israel and anybody who's connected to the situation after the 7th of October and the war we're still going through, we're all still in an ultramarathon. But I think also a lot of people out there in the world after COVID and the reality out there, we're all in a bit of an ultramarathon, and we have to think that way as a long distance runner. And when you realize that, then it gives you the legitimacy to take care of yourself preemptively. Just like when you're flying in the airplane and there's the oxygen drops, who are you supposed to put the mask on first? And the instinct is to put it on the kids, but no, the instructions are to put it on yourself first, even though it's counterintuitive. But that's the mentality that we have to have. We have to think about taking care of ourselves so that we can take care of others long run. And so that's the mentality, and that so it's all about the balance that we find. And so the balance between helping others and being altruistic and taking care of ourselves. And it always helps, those of us who are very, very values driven and we always want to be giving and taking care of others. We have to realize, okay, I'm doing this. It's not for myself. I'm taking care of myself in order to take care of other people. And then that takes away a lot of the guilt. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect is the balance between being, mission oriented and being, emotional, connected. And I talk about that when I talk about elite, performance. I talk about the ELITE, the elite, code in my mind is that the last E is execution, and that's what we're here for, and we want to execute. Everybody in there, if it's business, your business execution. If it's here in the war, you want to execute. But the way to execute has to go via the first E, which is the emotions and the emotional world, and that's what I call the E factor. And I suggest that everybody finds that balance, to have that E factor, and to realize that you can't just be in doing mode all the time, in execution mode. You gotta find the way to also be connected emotionally and find the way. And so for me, I was called up and had a really important mission, and I was dealing with the hostages. And so most of the time I had to be very mission oriented. There wasn't much room for my emotions because I'd be so focused, and it was such a a lot of people would tell me, like, my God, they're just to hear the word hostage, people would get the heebie-jeebies and would have literally like a panic attack just imagining, a hostage. Not to mention actually to meet a hostage who was returned. Like, for them, it was like overwhelming. But for me, I just felt like, okay, this is a mission that needs to be done. It's a super important one, and it's not. I can't get emotionally involved. I have to be, of course, empathetic and sensitive. But I had to find a way to put my emotions to the side, just like when a pilot, flying a mission, as a search and rescue helicopter pilot, and you go in under fire and to rescue wounded people, and you just put it aside, and the helicopter is full of people in bad shape. You don't think about it. You just do the mission, and afterwards you think about, oh wow, that was scary. But same thing here. I would find the way while I was doing the mission just to be focused. But every once in a while, it's important, and this is an important tip for people to realize also, as far as not to wait too long. Every once in a while to tap in, sort of like a pressure cooker, to allow yourself to have this like a sort of like a vent to let off some steam. Eventually, like, have this, the gasket, to let off some steam emotionally. And I found myself every once in a while, I'd have I would call it a power cry. Just like there's a power nap that's a few minutes, but it goes a long way. I would every once in a while just find myself just literally like bursting out in tears, and I'd allow that. Like, I wouldn't be freaked out by that. I'd let myself cry. I'd just get it out, sort of like the same discharge that I talked about before, to let it out of the system, and it would go a long way. And so I definitely recommend for people to, it doesn't have to be bursting out in tears, but at least like to let yourself choke up or whatever, let the emotions come up every once in a while. It's really important. And another thing I did actually was that you have to put down boundaries.
Sorry, Glenn, can I just add one thing here?
Sure.
So what I think is really interesting, that a lot of times the perception is that letting out an emotion is a weakness, because you can't just manage it, so to speak. You can't just hold it in. And you're saying here something very different. You're saying that this is actually the thing that'll give you more strength to keep enduring, especially if it's a long distance thing. Like, yes, if it's a mission that's a 3-hour mission, that's one thing. If it's a year-long ongoing project like what you're involved in, it's not a sign of weakness. It's actually the opposite. It's a tool to keep helping you go and keep staying strong. Is that accurate?
It's accurate, and it takes about about half a year for people to really be able to internalize that, believe that, and to buy into it. And of course, it's important to say it here, and for people to at least hear the words, and for to enter into into the minds, and it takes a lot of work. For me, I mean, that's, in my mind, really one of the most important keys to becoming, like almost like a superhero and a superpower, to realize that, I call it the paradox of weakness, or Brene Brown has a TED talk. She calls it the power of vulnerability. Once somebody, like you or me or guys out there, in the business world, or, high achievers, once you realize that paradox, that being in touch with your vulnerability and actually showing vulnerability is actually a strength and not a weakness. Once you realize that, then boom, you're on your way to discovering a superpower. And it's really that's the thing. And it's but it takes a lot of work, because like I'm already at a stage. I'm 60 years old. I'm already I've got enough mileage and success behind me to be able to to show weakness and vulnerability, and I suggest to people out there as soon as possible, to get friendly with your weaknesses and with your vulnerability, be able to share it, be able to show it, and that is a true strength of weakness, and to be emotional, when and I'll get up on stage also. When I talk about the hostages, I'll sometimes find myself choking up on stage in front of 600 people, and not only is it not a weakness, people they're like, oh wow, it makes me more human, and it connects them, and they so it has all the advantages, and there are no real disadvantages. Disadvantages are in your mind, because you think, oh, they're going to think I'm a pussy, or that's it's in your mind. If you feel comfortable about and confident about yourself, then you can show that vulnerability, and it's just a sign of strength. Well, there's another thing. If you ask like how I conducted myself and what helped me, there's another thing that helped me. Not just putting the oxygen mask on myself and taking care of myself and crying once in a while, going out in nature, but also I call it the feather technique. And I just happen to have, really, I didn't prepare this, but I have a feather here to demonstrate, because what I did was, at a certain stage when I felt I had so much stress and so much weight on my shoulders, imagine the role I had was, there's a lot of responsibility. Plus, I was taking care of, literally hundreds of soldiers and other people who needed resilience work. It was a lot on my shoulders. And at a certain stage when I felt, okay, this is already getting to be too much, I said to my family, to my wife and kids, I said, if anybody dares to put as much as a feather on my shoulder, then that's just going to be too much. And so then that became like our code. And if anybody, like if my daughter would say, oh, Dad, can you help me with the car insurance? And I say, feather, and so, and then they realize, okay, if I'm raising the feather, that means lay off, back off, give me my space, and I need to take care of myself. And so that's another thing that I suggest to people, not to be shy and to say, that's it, enough. Not just to actively help yourself with an oxygen mask, and to rest and to drink and to eat, before you're tired, thirsty, and whatever, but also to show other people and to put down boundaries and say, no, enough, stop. That's really important also.
I'll say this, the most interesting thing I've heard from what you just said right now, is the two words that are connected: guilt and legitimacy.
Guilt and
legitimacy.
Yeah.
That it's legitimate. And it's been very interesting, because I think a lot of the reason after October 7th, and I saw this, I experienced it myself, and I also saw it much, much more in others as well. They would go in this emotional downward spiral, or just didn't know what to do with themselves. And because of that, they just kept going and going and going, just burning themselves out and just starting to take unhelpful actions, let's call it that. And what was going on with a lot of that, what I sense is that they didn't feel it was legitimate for them to take care of themselves because there was no actual reason why. There was no concrete mission behind it. However, like having just, even if you don't have a specific mission of I'm going to do this, like what you did, but just having that kind of understanding, this is going to be an ultra marathon. This is going to be a long situation. And therefore, it's not legitimate. It's required that I preemptively take care of myself. That legitimacy of like saying, okay, this is going to be a thing that needs to be for the long run. I need to be prepared for it. I can see how that can combat the guilt of just like, I should be doing more, even if I don't know what to do with myself.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for sure. I think the guilt, a lot of us, also high achievers have guilt, if I'm not always, working hard to achieve more and, self-improvement and, just push harder and harder. It could be if I'm not doing a workout or if I'm not, doing some business meeting or whatever. A lot of us have that guilt. And I think the game changer, and we've talked about this a lot, is to realize that when you taking care of yourself, that's also a mission for just and even if taking care of yourself means it's just not doing anything and just like relaxing and not going and doing the workout, that's also taking care of yourself, and that's also a type of mission. And so whatever you do, even if it's not doing anything, that's also doing something. And then, like, you paradoxically somehow you flip it around, and then that leads you to feel okay every breathing moment. And I think that's something that I've talked about, like the sense of like just being able to go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning and feel okay about yourself, even if you're not doing something that's clearly advancing some goal. Just hanging out and relaxing is also serving that purpose, and that's really important to realize that, because so many of us high achievers are really guilt ridden, and it eats away at our energies and our reserve, and it's just it's a pity, because being in the being mode is also it helps the doing.
Yeah, so I want to say I appreciate you sharing that, and I wanted to bring that up because I know a lot of entrepreneurs, they feel so stressed about their business, and they say, I have people's livelihood, my employees in my hands, so I can't rest, I can't give myself permission, it's not legitimate for me to take a day off, whatever it may be. And I appreciate you sharing your example, because you literally deal with people's lives, not just their livelihood. It's a much deeper thing, and I don't think many entrepreneurs, if any, could say that their job is actually more stressful than yours and what you've done this past year. And I really appreciate, like, again, from afar, being able to see kind of your example through this and learning from it, and like honestly trying to be more like that.
Yeah, well, you want to hear the example of Iceland, what I actually did
Please.
there, because that I think is a really a good example of not just of how to be a high achiever, but also how to adapt according to the circumstances, and to take care of yourself despite everything that's going on around. Because I planned for my 60th birthday just this past year to do a 600-kilometer crossing of Iceland from coast to coast by bike and running. And this is like, I planned it way before the 7th of October. And this is like going to be an amazing thing. But then the war came, and I completely put it aside. And I was dealing just with hostages and soldiers and resilience work. But when it came closer to the date, I said, you know what? I feel this is really important. I think I need this. And not only do I need this, but I feel like this is I have an important message that I want to convey. And I decided to go ahead with this Iceland crossing in August, when at that time the flights there were no most international flights were canceled. We were literally under attack. The Iranians were about to send a barrage of missiles. Like, the whole country was locked down, and my son was in a combat position, and the hostages, the deal was brewing, and there were so many reasons why not to go to Iceland. Plus my wife didn't really want me to go, and so there were so many reasons why not. But I said, you know what, I am gonna do this almost, no matter what, or that, it wasn't no matter what, but it was against all odds. I'm going to, and also a lot of Iceland was about proving to myself that at the age of 60, I can do 600 kilometers and feel like, okay, I can do this, and for it to be symbolic for other things, but also to actually go, and my flight was canceled. And I managed to, I found some other rerouting, like 3 different flights with my bike box, every time loading it on a different plane. Just the fact that I managed to leave the country and get to Iceland, that in itself was an incredible accomplishment, while the Iranian missiles were like on the way to us. And then to actually cross Iceland, 600 kilometers in 8 days, and every single day, and the weather, and the 60-mile-an-hour winds, and the freezing cold, and the terrain, really against all odds, to actually do that under those circumstances, and all this while everybody back home is like under war, at war. I said, no, I need to do this for myself. This is a project, and I'm also going to show everyone and be an example, to walk the talk, to say, okay, this is an ultramarathoner's mentality, not just to actually do the ultramarathon, but this event is me taking care of myself and resting despite everything that's going on around us in the country. And so that was the point. And so everyone, you don't have to do 600 kilometers in Iceland, but the point is that, I suggest everybody takes some time off, look out for yourselves, because it does serve the greater cause, definitely.
To wrap this up, Glenn, are there any stories or any lessons from this past year that you want to share that you think will be useful to our audience?
Well, really, the bottom line is, and I see it again and again, that we are all capable of much more than we imagine. Take that as a given, and then realize that we underestimate ourselves, and we're only achieving about 10% of our potential. And I see this over and over and over and over again, and also with the 117 hostages, it just fortifies that position. And so that should be the main takeaway. And the fact that these hostages managed to do things that we teach our top commandos in POW training, and these just normal, regular civilians managed to pull this out of their toolkit. That who would have believed that they have this? It just means we all have this internal, inherent resilience and ability to cope and to accomplish so much more than we imagine. We just limit ourselves. So stop limiting ourselves, believe in ourselves, push forward little by little, out of our comfort zone, step by step, and we'll all be able to do so much more and live the lives that we should be living.
Very well said. Glenn, I want to say a big thank you for coming on. I've greatly appreciated having you as a mentor, as a friend, someone I learned a lot from. And I want to thank you for coming on the pod for the first time. How can people find you if they want to learn more, if they want to connect with you, or any of the projects that you're working with?
Yeah, I'd love to be in touch. You can contact me by my website, glenncohen.com. It's Glenn with 2 N's and -Cohen.com. I'll be happy to be in touch with anybody.
So we'll put that in the show notes below, guys. You can find those links. Glenn, thank you again for coming on. Appreciate it.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure. You're the star.